I'm just kind of wondering if you can help establish some continuity in the historical narrative. You know, what brings us from 9/11 to January 6th to the present and going forward?
Well, let's start with Robert Jackson, chief prosecutor at Nuremberg. What you quoted was his address to the tribunal, saying, as you said, we're handing these defendants a poison chalice. If we sip from it, we must suffer the same fate. Crucial element in Nuremberg was what they called the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes in that it includes all of the consequences that follow. That's aggression, a crime of aggression. There is a treaty called the United Nations Charter, which is the basis for international law. It bars the threat or use of force in international affairs, except under conditions that apply. There is something called the US Constitution, which everybody is supposed to worship, especially if you're on the right, carry it around in your pocket, you love it, and so on. Well, if anybody bothers to read it, Article 6 says that treaties entered into by the United States government are the supreme law of the land, and anyone who violates them has to be brought to justice. Well, there's a treaty, the UN Charter, the major treaty. Every US president violates it. Some violate it extremely. Remember, it says threat or use of force. Have you ever heard of threat of force from a US president? Okay. How about use of force, like invading Afghanistan and invading Iraq? In brief, George Bush, Dick Cheney, the rest of them, can add Obama, they're all guilty of violating the US Constitution. Did you ever see anybody write about it? Actually, I've occasionally, just for fun, I write about it, but occasionally for fun, I've brought it up at talks at law schools, good law schools, faculty, seminars. People listen, they say, kind of interesting. Let's go on to the next topic. Okay, I'm sure you can find plenty of analogs right where you are. Okay, well, that's what Gramsci called hegemonic common sense. It's just built into us. Yes, we're a gang of criminals. We don't have to pay attention to the Constitution. We can kill anybody we like. I mean, let's go on with that. Suppose that Iran right now was carrying out a global assassination campaign in which the leaders sat down every Tuesday morning, read a little bit of the Islamic equivalent of St. Augustine and Just War, and then judiciously decided who they're going to assassinate today. Namely, of the many people around the world who they consider might be a threat to them, which ones should we assassinate today? How would the Australian press react to that? How do they react when it actually happens? During the Obama administration, it's exactly what was described. Obama, Brennan, sat down Tuesday morning, read a chapter from St. Augustine, pondered the question, who should we murder today? And one of the people who we think might turn out to be a threat to us, maybe some collateral damage if people happen to be standing across the street. That's called drone warfare. Okay, just goes on. It's our right. We have the right to be criminals, murderers, do whatever we like because we say we're good. In fact, it's interesting to look at the commentary on the Iraq War or the Afghan War. Take Iraq. There are people who are greatly honored for having opposed the Iraq War, like Barack Obama, most prominent of them, who described the war as a strategic blunder. Well, I think we've heard that phrase before. Go back to Nazi Germany. There are plenty of top generals who said it's a strategic blunder to carry out Operation Barbarossa to invade the East, two-front war. Ought to knock England out first. Do we honor them as great heroes? No. If we have, I haven't seen it. In fact, we regard it as criminal. That's them. This is us. Let's take the invasion of Afghanistan. Everyone is supposed to have loved that. In fact, global opinion was mostly against it, but what do they know? The Anglosphere was in favor of it. United States, England, Australia, that's what matters. They had no international authorization. Plain crime of aggression. What did the Afghans think about it? Kind of an interesting question. We have evidence about it. There was an anti-Taliban Afghan resistance with some very famous and honored figures leading it, like Abdul Haq, later murdered by the Taliban. He bitterly condemned the invasion. He said the Americans just want to kill a lot of Afghans. It's going to undermine our efforts, which are succeeding to overthrow the government from within. The Americans are doing it because they want to show their muscle and intimidate everyone. He was backed by a meeting of 1,000 tribal elders, got together, issued a declaration pretty similar to this by the main women's group. We're supposed to be concerned about Afghan women. Rawa, major women's group, issued a similar declaration saying, yes, we want to overthrow the Taliban, but it's the responsibility of the Afghan people, not invaders from the outside. Did this bother anyone? Has it even been reported? Well, actually, if you look closely, there's a little bit of reporting. There was the interview with Abdul Haq actually was reported in The Guardian, London, but it has no effect. They don't count. They're what sometimes been called unpeople, not real people, just people that are in the way.
It is striking the consistency with which the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the U.S. wars there, are referred to as disasters or mistakes, fundamental errors, rather than great immoralities.
There is a word called crime, supreme international crime. That's part of the poison chalice. Nothing that the US or Britain or Australia does can be called a crime. Maybe it can be a mistake. In our innocence, we didn't understand something. Couldn't be a crime. The crimes are for others.